Hello.
Hello.
Hello. What's up, man?
Hey.
What's going on? What's on, guys?
Hey, Penguin.
Looking busy trying to stuff a little food in my face real quick.
Right on.
Yeah, I got some food here, but I got some drinks. So I got a juice, whatever. So I'll drink that. That'll suffice for me for now. Oh yeah, we're live, by the way. We're just
all right.
I just joined the room listening. and started broadcasting.
Nice.
Yeah. So why not?
Fuck, we'll do it live.
I went on today. I was like, oh, it's gonna be a nice day. I'll do some stuff after I get done recording with Ernie Hancock, and then that went like for fucking 3 hours. So.
Oh yeah, Ernie can do that too.
Damn.
Yeah.
Man, awesome. he can talk for sure.
Oh yeah, no, he's one of the best.
Yeah, no, he was talking, and I'm like, I gotta pee. I can't wait for him to stop and say I gotta pee. And I just went and peed, and I came back, and he was still talking, just like didn't even know I left. I don't know. So then I had to like run around, like I wanted to get some stuff done on the homestead since it's a nice day. So then I was running around trying to do that, and then I was like, oh fuck, I haven't eaten. I have to eat something.
Yeah.
Stuffing food in my face. I don't know. It's been a kind of a oddly busy day for some reason.
Yeah, here's the trick. Go ahead, Penguin.
Go ahead. No, I have nothing to say. Go ahead. What's up?
Oh, I was just going to say
you holding this flask.
This is a wide mouth bottle. Okay, some of us need that, others don't need the wide mouth. And this is not for drinking water. This is a professional podcaster's trick. If it gets going 3 hours, and boy, you got to go.
I know. I was especially, I was drinking water. I was probably we started at 11. I still had a coffee left over, too. And I had a water, and like halfway through, I'm like, I'll wait till like he comes back, and then I'll respond to what he said. And then I'll be like, I got to run. But I'm like, he was talking. I'm like, no, I got to go like now, not later.
Yeah. What'd you guys talk about? What was
homesteading and like some Carl Hess stuff and guerrilla gardening and I don't know, the state of the world autonomy, where things are going.
Yeah. Awesome. Can't wait to hear it.
Should be out next week.
Cool. Yeah, he's usually pretty quick with those.
Yeah. What do we want to talk about?
I'm up to anything.
All right, let's let it roll.
Yeah.
We'll figure it out as we go, because I don't think any of us have any shortage of the talking, I don't know.
No, we're all professionals here.
Yeah. All right, so we're streaming now. Hold on, let's see.
I think Penguin's away for right this second, but
Oh, right on. We are live. Oh yeah, BRB. What's new, man? How's things going over your end?
Yeah, pretty good.
Are you still on Ice Planet over there?
Yeah, well, I was in the 50s actually past couple days. Not negative. We saw that,
nice.
But other way. But yeah, no, not terrible. Not terrible.
Yeah, all last week I think it was like in the t-shirt weather. It was in the 60s, man. We were out in the mountains hiking. It was a t-shirt. It was fucking beautiful. But then like I think yesterday it got cold again and snowed. And then today it was cold in the morning, but then got back up to it's probably like 50 something now.
Yeah.
But sunny with no breeze, so it's nice.
Not bad.
Yeah, I think we're gonna get another cold snap though. I don't think it's spring here yet. I don't know. It fools me every year. They have what's called a false spring, so it's like been cold, and then it'll get like warm for like 2 weeks, and you're like, fuck yeah, and you're outside, and you're like, yeah, all right, spring, and you're getting all this shit ready for it's a homestead, so we're getting all the gardens ready. We're like, we should fucking plant. It's beautiful out, and then like a week later, it's like fucking 10. You know what I mean? And then winter comes back for another like 3 weeks. But it just gets your hopes up.
Yeah, we get tempted to move where it's warmer, partly just because I don't know. I want Ellen to wear less clothes.
Yeah. Nice.
That's really the only reason I give a shit.
I know my lady wears like sundresses year round. I'm like, yes, that's
right, exactly. Exactly. It's like, yeah.
I'll tell you, man, I'm from the Northeast, and
yeah,
I love a lot about the Northeast.
yeah.
But where I'm at now is like all the best parts of the Northeast without the fucking crazy cold winter. You know what I mean?
Without the extremes. Yeah,
right.
I hear that.
So we get the 4 seasons, which I like. It's it's mountainous here, which I liked about the Northeast. There's a lot of woods and stuff, and like I'm used to up north. A lot of beautiful rivers and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But it doesn't have the fucking feet of snow, that's the only that's the plus about down here. So I would tell everybody, like, look, man, this is like the Northeast but better,
Yeah, right.
Because I lived in Southern California, and I was like, yeah, it's fucking 70, but after a while it's 70 all the time there, except when it's 120.
Yep.
But after a while, I'm like, I kind of miss the fall, I miss the seasons and, the tree, it's desert and palm trees out there. It's kind of whole different vibe. And after a while, I kind of miss the woods and the fall and the mountains and stuff. So,
yeah. No, I hear that. I mean, I lived in Florida for years. I lived in the literal Sherwood Forest, or at least where Sherwood Forest was filmed,
nice.
for the original Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn.
Nice.
So it's like, wow, this is a dream, but then like you just get sick of it. I don't know.
Yeah, there's something about the change throughout the year that it keeps it like less monotonous. I don't know.
Yep.
So I dig it.
All right. I guess I'll just go ahead and intro this thing, and
let's do it, Penguin.
Let's roll. We already started rolling, so let's roll.
Yeah, it's fine.
Yeah. Hold on. Let me clean my glasses off so I don't really need to see anything, but just I feel kind of naked without them. All right.
Hold on. Let me mute. Puff on the vape.
Welcome back to another Into the Void episode with Brian Sovereign joining us. As usual, it's me, Penguin, and Sek Magora. We have another exciting one of these. I don't know. It's like our 4th or 5th Into the Void episode. Great to see you back, Brian.
Yeah, man, great to be back. Yeah, I think we're number 5. I think that's what we're at.
Well, our first one wasn't. Yeah. It might be listed as 4. It is technically 5. Or it might be listed as 5 and technically 6. But yeah, these things are fun. We've definitely had more of these than any other kind of, ongoing thing. Definitely, as we always say, our most frequent guests on the show by a long shot at this point.
Yeah, always honored.
Yeah, I don't think there's anybody else in the running anymore. I think you lapped everybody else.
Yeah. I do that in life in general. Yeah.
So, Sek, what's going on with you? Anything new you want to share?
Well, no, not really. I mean, I just got done doing. I'll announce it here. I just got done doing an interview with Ernest Hancock from Declare Your Independence. So, our podcast got on national radio, syndicated radio, or whatever. So,
Ernest is one of the best. That's awesome.
Yeah, he's a cool guy. I like him, and he's a doer, which I kind of dig, and that's why why he had me on. So, so that was fun. That boy can talk. So we went 3 hours or so, 11-2, I think, or something like that. And so look for that. That'll be out next week. I'll link it everywhere that people listen to me. So, but you want an update on the truck? Oh man, I need to.
Guys,
we used to have a joke, me and my buddies, that like we're punching ourselves in the nuts whenever things were going bad, and we just made a joke that we just need a big wooden fist and just fucking smack our nuts into it, because that's how fucking life goes. So, update on the truck. I took out a loan to pay for a good majority of the initial work, and then I found out that I need another 4 to 5 grand I need to put into the thing, because there's a sort of adjacent problem. I don't know how much y'all know, but there's a problem with the
What is it? Tell
EGR
me.
valve.
Oh, I
Problem
have
with
no idea.
the emission the EGR valve, which is something to do with the emission system. It's a exhaust gas recirculator or whatever the thing. And that was probably because my injection pump was going bad, so it was burning a lot of shit, and that fouled part of my emission system. And now, the way these things operate, the truck would run fine with this being a problem, but the computer will stop the truck from moving, if that makes sense. So now I got to drop another 4 grand into this thing, and I am just fucking furious and stressed like you wouldn't believe.
Computers have absolutely no place in vehicles.
In a vehicle. I'll tell you
It's
what,
outrageous.
man, I am never again buying a newer vehicle ever.
Mhm.
Just not doing it. I'm getting everything I buy is going to be like pre-1990s. Yes,
Yep.
they had computers in them then, but they weren't nearly as involved as or related to literally everything in the vehicle then. You know, it was
it didn't have like the OBD2 system in it.
Right.
So really all the computer was doing was controlling largely the firing of the spark
pistons.
plugs.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's almost all that it did. And I mean, yes, you could argue that it did help, and that wouldn't be until like 82 when those started getting added in. You could argue that it would help with fuel efficiency to some degree, but even, I mean, that's a small argument, and you could do that physically anyway. You didn't need a computer to do those sorts of things. But anyway, yeah, just outrageous. I always tell people buy cars pre 1996 before they put the major computers in them. It's just stupid. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I
Yeah.
I can't do it. And my sister keeps giving me a hard time. She's like, "That's what you get for buying domestic vehicles, like American made." And if so, I have a 2500 diesel, and I need that 2500 diesel to haul the equipment that I use for my business. I
That's
need
what
to have,
Americans make.
Yep.
and there isn't a comparable foreign vehicle that at least that's sold in the US. So like Toyota and Nissan and such, apparently this is car talk, but the car talk episode, but there isn't like a Toyota or Nissan that's sold in the US that is that they have some diesels, but they're not beefy enough to actually like do any kind of serious hauling. So I'm not tied to GM. It's just they happen to have some of these foreign companies do not have the comparable vehicle for whatever reason that is.
Yeah,
I think a lot of it's to do with
go ahead,
tariffs. To be honest, a lot of it's to do with tariffs and protectionism. Honestly, that's the truck market.
Probably, yeah.
The light to like medium to heavy duty trucks. Both of those ends of the spectrum, they're heavily like that. So that's where the U.S. obviously. It's like the one thing I know about this topic. Yeah. So this is like the one automotive sector of the automotive market that the U.S. really dominates. This you might get U.S. automakers with a hit on some specific thing. I mean, you would see the Ford Focus comes kind of a hit overseas in some places and this and that, but really it's the trucks. It's the big three manufacturers, pickups, the small and also the heavy duty trucks. But the reason you get they dominate so much is it is like a huge, tremendous tariff put on these foreign pickups. And that's really the only thing that's keeping them in business and preventing them from just getting absolutely slaughtered. And that's obviously the only thing that keeps these automakers in business.
IP and protectionism. Yeah.
Protectionism. Because because I'm not saying, Toyota's tremendously popular. Honda, I would love to buy a Ridgeline, but imagine if they could actually. So imagine they're competitive with the tariff. Imagine without that, they and the U.S. only really has an auto manufacturing sector because of these trucks. So, they're not making their money on compact cars or anything like that.
Yeah, it's a funny thing. I know in the late 90s, Nissan did try to bring more of their truck division here, but it just didn't sell. Like, and it couldn't compete with, I mean, it's not a thing because it couldn't compete with Ford, and GM, who really dominate in these spaces with making the big engines and the big rigs. And um, I think part of that comes down to that, especially with Ford, like even in the late 90s, those were still fairly repairable by the owner. Fairly. I mean, they had, again, the more advanced computers in them, sure, but they're still fairly repairable, as to where in Japan, I mean, that's just that's not the case. And I've often wondered about this because like speaking of terrorism, not necessarily terrorism is just a conflict, just a war, but you had was it in Libya in the late 80s, it was like 86 and 87, you had what literally gets called the Toyota Wars, right? And this is due to the fact that
The Chad War.
Chads, right, the Chad War, they were using Toyota Hiluxes like as military vehicles, and they were incredible. Like, I mean, they were really
I would
rocking.
kill for a Hilux.
Right. I mean, I can even remember episodes of Top Gear where they're like driving those things up to volcanoes. Those things are so damn tough. And so it's a funny thing that, well, I'm not exactly sure where I'm going with that, but anyway, I think, or I guess where I was going to go with it is, I get the sense that Japan like didn't want things to be repairable because they didn't want to, the companies didn't want their brands to be the names of any wars going into the future. So they wanted these things to die. But anyway, that's just a funny little
I gotta tell you, I got a love in my heart for like the older light duty Toyota trucks. Those were good little trucks, man. And they'd run forever. And if all I needed was
running in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, I had a buddy. He had I don't know, it was a T100, and it was beat up and whatever else. And I used to give him a hard time. And he's like, "Say whatever you want, but this thing's got 500,000 miles on it, and there's nothing wrong with it. It just gets just
I
drives."
still see them.
Yeah. So I mean, so the Toyota and whoever else, Nissan, they make some really good like light duty trucks, and those they're awesome. But that's not what I need. They need to get some heavy duty trucks in the market in America. And I don't know if it's just protectionism or IP or what, or it's just most of the dudes that are people that buy trucks are like kind of good old boy and are like, I need American made or whatever the thing,
I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah. That's probably a large part of it,
Yeah.
I think it was, but if you could undercut these huge prices on these diesels and stuff, I mean,
they're going for like $80,000 to $100,000 right now.
Yeah, price competition means something.
Yeah, for sure. And they're all shit. Like all the people were giving me a hard time because I've got a Chevy Duramax. And well, that's what you get for buying Chevy or whatever the thing. I'm like, look, let me show you. It's the exact same parts in Ford and in Chrysler or Cummins or whatever. It's the same. They're the same freaking trucks. It might be a slightly different motor, but all their other components are virtually the same. They're the same specs, same everything. They're all junk. They're all complete junk. And they're charging like $80,000 to $100,000 for a brandy new 2,500 from either Ford or Chevy or whatever the thing, and they're worse than they were 20 years ago.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I had some early 2000s Duramaxes, and they were awesome trucks. Yes, it was harder to work on them than it was previously, but you didn't have the same problems that you have now. And so somebody sent me a link just recently. And the problem that I'm having is something that existed in the 2011 to 2017 models. It's the C4 fuel injection pump, and it's a pile of junk. It was made for trucks, diesels in Europe, where the sulfur in the diesel, there's a lot more sulfur in the diesel in Europe than there is in the United States. So that sulfur acts as a lubricant in these parts. They use the same pump for Europe as they did for here without any way to lubricate the internal workings of the pump, nor anything to stop that the metal shavings that would come out of that pump when it failed from going into the rest of your fuel system. So that was a problem there's been class action lawsuit after class action lawsuit. Somebody just sent me a link, and 2023 They're doing a recall right now for the same fucking problem. So they haven't even fixed it. Do you know what I mean? Like, but they're doing a recall now, but they were still putting the same pump in the 2023 that you're going to pay $80,000 to $100,000 for. It's outrageous. I'm never doing it again. I'm never buying a new vehicle again. It's just, I'm not going to do it. It's, it's more, there's more. The reason I went with a newer vehicle this time is because I went and looked at the used truck market, and they wanted a lot of money for used trucks that were really, really beat up. And I'm like, man, I'm just going to inherit somebody else's problems, and I'm going to pay too much for it. So I went and got a new truck thinking like, oh, well, I'm not a huge fan of these new trucks, but at least it's new. I'll have less problems. I've had more problems out of this truck than I also have a 99 Dodge 1500. I've had more problems out of my 2016 Duramax than I have my 99 Dodge Ram. So we had that made that joke on another episode, Penguin, me and you, where it's like a fridge from the 80s will outlast time. You know what I mean?
Yes.
But like a fridge now, you're lucky it lasts you 5 years. You know what I mean? It's a lot of it's planned obsolescence and just shoddier work. And Brian, you're the one that really crystallized this for me. Is they're not producing for the consumer anymore. They're producing for their stockholders. That's who they're serving. And you might think that might be the same thing, but it's not. What serves the stockholders is shittier product, pushing out more shittier units and growth. And you can't have growth if you make anything that lasts you 20 years. It's just not, not the way it happens.
They hadn't progressed and engineered in all the planned obsolescence that they could. And I guess it takes time because people have to accept that. I guess that's the real limiting factor on them, is that people have to accept that. So it's kind of, it's overall long-term trend is it creates a society where, lose my thought. It creates a society was trying to maximize just like throughput and GDP. So you're just constantly pushing out shit that has to be replaced and replaced and replaced. And I don't know, this kind of goes back to what some of Kevin Carson's work. I think it's Homebrew. It might have been Homebrew and the Iron Fist behind the Invisible Hand, but it's the same basic deal. That the goal was to kind of push through more production, and on the macro level, and I guess what you consider the micro level, basically, like you said, for the company, on the company's scale, to increase profits for the shareholders, keep those machines running, keep units moving.
Yeah, you got a couple things really going on there. There's the shareholder part, and I do want to talk more about that a little bit. But also you do have where, even if, let's say these companies, wanted to be on the up and up, and they wanted to make things in such a way that they could be like, a Maytag washer from 1970 that somehow is still operating 50, 60 years later. They want to, like, even if they're going to make things right, build them quote unquote right to where they're built to last or something, you still want to incentivize people to buy your new models. Now, the way you do that, of course, is put in new features. Problem is, new features generally create, or fall into another, what I would call it almost a truism, no, I wouldn't go there. But anyway, an old saying, which is the more you overthink the plumbing, the easier it is to stop the drain. And that's really, like, the more complex they make these things, there's just more to break. There's just more to go wrong. And that's the same thing that's happening, I think, largely with Sex Truck, as far as like the computer being the issue, even though mechanically there's no reason that it can't run. But then, Cory Doctorow did a fairly recent piece, I want to say maybe just the past couple months, called The Enshittification of Platforms. Now, he was talking more about social media and a lot of other things, but I think this is true for most, that there's just, with business as is, there's just this path of where, okay, you make something quality with features, everything's consumer facing, right? It's for the consumer, like Sek was saying, or like what Sek was saying that I was saying, it's for the consumer, et cetera, et cetera. But then it gets to the point where, yes, like you build up that base, you build up that user base, and then you have to, usually you go public, you bring in investors, and then you have to please the investors. I love the term alone. That's why I bring it up, is the enshittification of things.
Yeah,
And
that's
again,
precisely right.
yeah,
I'm gonna have to read that. That's precisely right. That sounds right to me for sure.
yeah, it's a great piece. Again, he was talking more about like online platforms, but I think it's true across the board. And he brings up examples in other, or not across, but most of the board. How about that? But he brings up examples and other things. Uh, his solution for enshittification is, okay, fine. You just got to know where to go next. Like, what's the next company to run to, and know where to go and be able to take everything with you. Again, he's talking more about online platforms, say like Twitter and moving to Mastodon, but you can't just move to Mastodon, right? Because you don't carry your Twitter followers over with you. So the value proposition isn't there. But again, the term overall, I think, fits and applies to a lot of aspects of at least the market we're dealing with right now, in shitification. So what do you got, Penguin?
Oh, yeah. So it basically it's the need for constant growth and expansion from publicly held or investor controlled companies that you've got companies, and it's not every company. It's the you're looking at this for, in the rearview mirror. So you're looking at you're filtering for companies that have created a successful product, that have established a user base, that have made a name for themselves, that have this good product that people like. And then, of course, once you get into the point where I guess it just seems that the company is going to need to expand and get to that next level and have this be flush with cash for these investors. Which you got to ask, what do you need to be flush with all this cash for? But because obviously the obvious next step is to use that cash to greatly expand the business. But of course, they're going to demand increasing returns, and that's not going to stop after a finite period of time. That's going to continue to be the case. So, like Twitter. I mean, it's a great example, and it's also the one I use. But you can imagine Facebook or anything. They have all these features that people like, but they just have to constantly be pressured to come up with more and more and more stuff. And what if, as a user, as a user base in the aggregate, I don't really need it? This is pretty much optimal. This is why it's popular. There's like a bajillion people on here, and they're constantly. And then even now, it's funny because you see in the Elon Musk era, he's just constantly tweaking, adding these little useless features, and people were complaining. I don't really notice them one way or another, but just like the view count on the tweets and just like all these unnecessary changes. But you see that on even other platforms. They'll go through them. Even I remember when Facebook would go over these updates, and sometimes they were pretty drastic, at least visually, and on the user experience. And it's just like, they're going to have to keep doing that, because you can't really just stagnate or as a business in this kind of investor driven capitalist environment.
It's encoded into law. So by law, you have to produce growth for you have to act in a way that will produce growth for your investors, like by law.
Right.
So
there's a percentage that, yeah, exactly.
So that's not even like you have to make money for your investors. You have to increase profits at all times for your investors. So that's necessarily, I mean, I think that's where a lot of this stems from, is that's the, I don't know exact wording of the law, but that's essentially it, is that you have to create growth for your investors by law if you are a publicly shared company. So that has a lot of, that is where I think a lot of these perverse incentives stem from. It's not so much that it's not even like you can continue to make decent money. You always have to make more and more and more and more. So that leads us to shittier quality products and planned obsolescence and disposable everything. Right. And then here we are.
Yeah, I don't even know that it's always, like this stuff doesn't always have to be even malicious. Like it's just something that they have to do. They don't have a choice. I think Facebook tried to like get around this by buying their competition, but not shutting it down. Traditionally what would happen is, Ma Bell, AT&T or IBM or whoever would buy their competition and then shut it down. Or even, you think like GM will buy out another car company and then eventually shut it down. Whatever the case may be. And when that the problem is that usually doesn't seem to work, and it certainly hasn't helped Facebook any, because they still have to go through the same process. Like Instagram has to get perverted into an ad platform, or WhatsApp has to get perverted into an ad platform, even though like this is kind of the solution they're trying to go with is, okay, Facebook is becoming meaningless. Let's buy out what's popular, what the next thing is, and then we still own it and we keep going forward, but nothing really changes. And I can't help but think that, well, there's another old saying that the richest person you know is actually the poorest. And what that means is they're the most in debt. And this is a great irony, is that all these people that get held up, and I don't care who they are, from Bezos to Musk to, I mean, half of the nonsense that Elon Musk is doing with Twitter is to try and get out of like what he's going to effectively owe lenders, for even buying Twitter in the first place. Like people that we consider poor, in the United States, a lot of them percentage wise are actually more wealthy than, like as far as, again, percentage, ratio comparison to money and debt, are actually wealthier than Jeff Bezos. Now that sounds crazy, right? And you could say, well, who the hell cares if you get to live like Jeff Bezos? And I understand that point, but like these people, it's just like, and I've talked about this recently on some of my episodes, but it's the same thing with like bodybuilders, right? You look at bodybuilders, you think they're the healthiest people alive. No, they're the second, if not the first highest group, just waiting for heart disease to occur, because, the human body is just not meant to carry around 300 pounds of mass. It doesn't matter if it's muscle or fat. And with that, but again, you think that they've got it great. Oh, they're this, they're that, whatever. Like, no, it's just not true. And I wonder about this sometimes, how much this lending, how far does this go back to where, because it's something, and I think we've even talked about it maybe on Into the Voids. And, I think you both were hitting at this too, but like this idea of the Church of Eternal Growth, or like you said, Sek, how it's in law that they have to grow. What is behind this Church of Eternal Growth? And sometimes I wonder what it comes down to is the reason these companies have to grow, and not just like kick back and enjoy the interest on whatever the hell they're doing, or at the very least, just have like a more steady state, is that like there's debts that have to get paid back probably 1,000 years. I don't know. It's we don't really know what's really owed anywhere. And anyway, anybody got any thoughts on that?
Well, I got to say, as much as I enjoy this conversation, it's not weird enough.
No, so I know.
We might have to take a weird turn.
Yeah.
This actually just came out of the truck conversation anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
We've never really gotten past the intro.
Right. No, this is all important information, but maybe we should do we want to veer off into a weirder direction?
Yeah.
Okay. I got a couple of different things we can go, and I'll leave it up to you guys. We could talk about, I had a response to one of our other Into the Voids about Israel.
Oh boy.
We could talk about that. We could talk about reality being objective, or maybe being a hologram. We could talk about that. We could talk about, actually, no, here, let me go into this, and then we can spring off into something else. So, right. Brian, this is, so call it what you like, synchronicity or what have you. But right around the time, and this isn't the first time this has happened, that years ago, I was really heavy into like mysticism and the occult and whatever else. And, and then I kind of veered off and just did the grind and didn't really think about that all that much for a number of years. And then a couple of years back, I sort of took a turn back into it and started getting into it again and doing some reading. And I don't know, I was watching a lot of, Terrence McKenna and whoever else, and getting back into sort of mysticism again. But at the same time, you took the same turn. Shane from the Vanu podcast went down this road as well. He's been delving into sort of spirituality and mysticism again. And now my question is this sort of like a synchronicity, or are we a similar type of personality, or are we picking up on something in the culture that we are reacting to? Do you see what I mean? Like, it's weird that, and this isn't the first thing that happened there. Like when we were talking about the Agora delivery system, there was like 3, 4, 5 of us that all came to the same idea like at the same time, and then all sort of converged on that topic. And then so it's happening again with like spirituality is a weird word. I don't like it either. Mysticism, call it whatever you like. There's a number of us that sort of went down that path again. Now, why now, I guess, is my question to you. Is there something in the air? You know, are we picking on something that we don't even really realize? Or is it just more comfortable to talk about now? Like, what do you think about that?
Oh boy.
I guess,
Well-
why did you start going down this path again now, or at least talking about it?
Yeah. So, okay. As far as me now, all right. I obviously there's never just one reason for anything. You know, I say that all the time. There's at least 3, and there could be a lot more to this one. I mean, I'll bring up a couple things as far as what, and this is even in this reasoning, there's part and parcel in this, and so libertarianism, okay, as I think people who have been in libertarianism for a while, and I don't mean like the Murray Rothbard types or anything who like were part of the founding of the Libertarian Party or anything in the 80s or anything like that. I'm talking about the libertarianism that grew out of, say, like the Ron Paul movement, you know, say like 2008. And when the internet also and social media started to become a thing, there was a confluence of things that were occurring. Basically, there was a space, and it happened to be Facebook, where like-minded individuals could really come together from all over the world, and they did. And so you had this time from, say, like 2010, 2011, whenever Facebook more opened up outside of just allowing college students to use it. You had this time frame from 2011 to like 2015, I want to say, where Facebook was like, that was Ancapistan. Like, that was the libertarian nation, frankly. Now, within that, there, you know, a lot of arguments going back and forth and everything, and a lot of podcasts kind of came out of that environment, partly out of constantly responding to the arguments, frankly, happening on Facebook. And if other people don't want to admit that this is how it was, I mean, they don't have to admit it, but they're wrong. You know, like this is, I consider this pretty much fact. And I'd love to, if I still had a Facebook account, I'd almost love to go back, you know, to that time, and you could just see it. Like, I mean, it's, again, history will show it. We'll talk about it, I'm sure, at some point whenever all this opens up, but regardless. Okay. So you had that time frame. And people were really excited. There were a lot of good ideas. Okay. But honestly, after, say, 5 years, and if you want to be generous, let's give it to 2017, even after 7 years, nothing changed. Like nothing at all changed. Like, if anything, things just kept getting worse. As much as it looked like, wow, there's so many liberty-minded people out there. There's this, there's that. This is great, blah, blah, blah. And nothing changed. And it didn't matter how logical the arguments were. And honestly, those logical arguments existed long before the internet was even a thing, or even computers were a thing. Okay. Again, nothing was really changing. And you really just had this circle jerk going on, you know, online. Say it became Twitter after Facebook, whatever, but you just had a circle jerk going on where you had like libertarians just kind of arguing with each other about varying ideas. And hey, I fell into it too. I'm not like claiming to be above it all necessarily. And part of the reason that I was finally willing to open up, say, starting in 2019 and particularly with 2020, part of the reason I was starting to open up was I was like, okay, none of this is working. None of this is working. And I felt a certain confidence in the idea that because the logic wasn't necessarily winning the day, and even actions that were being done in real life weren't really winning the day, it kind of solidified for me that there is a mystical aspect to existence that is keeping people from being truly free. That's part of it. Again, this is only part of it. And there's another part I want to get into that's related to this as well. Okay. But that when I came when that really solidified for me, I was like, okay, and I can remember talking to my now wife about it at the time and saying, yeah, like I have to start talking about Kabbalah. Like I have to start talking about mysticism. I mean, I always sort of was, and I was always hinting at the ideas, but I was always using like science or whatever to get the same point across.
You were for years on your podcast dropping hints that,
Yeah,
and I've said this to you before, that only people who knew what you were saying would know what you were saying.
Yep.
So you were doing it for years, but you were never like explicit and overt. Like to the point where like you'd say something and be like, wait a minute, I know where he's getting that from. Like he's talking about this X, Y, or Z thing. And I'm like, oh, okay. So there's more to fucking Brian than just a tech show here. Like you've been doing that for years and years. And I picked up on that, but now you're like outright with it, which is a whole slightly different thing,
Yeah, exactly. And I appreciate you saying that. But yeah, that's really it. Like it's always kind of been there, but then it just got to the point where it's like, okay, no, we got to talk about this because this is where a lot of the quote unquote real solutions come from. I mean, and as real a solution and concurrent solution as, outlaw gardening and all of these other great things, that are absolutely part of the material world and really part and parcel of it all. And so, and also like the direction, another part of it for me, I want to just get in two more parts and then we can kind of expand. Another part of it for me was that the tech world was just going in the wrong direction. Like technology was just not, it stopped democratizing, it stopped empowering the individual, and it just ended up empowering Silicon Valley and corporatist bullshit. Like it just, and it's a pity because a lot of this stuff like encryption could have become far more mainstream. So many wonderful technologies could have become and things that where the individual had a lot more control of their life and control of their data could have happened. And there was a chance for it to do that. And it just didn't. And so I could no longer espouse technology as the great solution as to where it had an opportunity to at least be a major part of it. But that did not happen. So, and keep in mind, folks, like I've been doing my show for over 10 years. So, that's a long time for things to change or, for something to happen. And again, this just didn't happen. The other part of it that I'll bring up quickly is, and this has to do with like the whole online movement of libertarianism, frankly, dying off, I think. And again, it died off years ago, but you did have, I think, a lot of people, and I could even fall into this too, where like, okay, I just don't want to deal with people's like arguments of, oh, Brian Sovereign said this, and like, don't listen to him anymore. This is terrible, and blah, 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 blah. And a lot of it came, and I'll just say this outright, a lot of it came down to people who followed Molly Knox, and people should know who I'm talking about right there. But Molly Knox, I think, was one of the biggest things that kept mysticism from being accepted, explored, and taken as the genuine solution that it is for freedom in people's lives. And so I put a lot of blame right there because, and it's not even him, it's more his followers were so, I'll call them hyper rational. Like they were just constantly like they were so like they were so online, they would just shut down, like any conversation. Like if I talked about Kabbalah,
not an argument.
Yeah, not right. That's exactly what they'd say. Not an argument, like if I talked about Kabbalah in 2014, like my show probably would have just been, I don't know, somehow they would have figured out to get it banned. I mean, these people were so terrible. It's no surprise that there have been multiple documentaries that it's a cult and blah, 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 and whatever, because it was that bad. I mean, now they've all, kind of become Republicans or something else. And I don't know. And so like, if you're still in the libertarian or anarchist realm, they're not a part of the equation. So it doesn't matter. But that was another major factor. So there's a lot going on. I want to hear what you guys have to say about that. I mean, I could get into kind of the age of Aquarius after 2012.
Woo!
Yeah, that's a whole other.
The age of Horus is over.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole other thing that we could get
Right.
into. But if you want to talk about,
That's kind of
these
where I
first-
thought you would have went with it, but
Yeah, that's all right.
fine. So basically, you're not making an argument, but you're saying that the space exists for these ideas now, where it would before all the oxygen in the room was sucked out by nerds, basically, like uber logical, like permanently online, Molyneux supporters or whatever the thing, where. And
that is a dated little that is a very dated ideological subset, and you're right, they're gone.
Very
They've all
abrasive.
dissolved. Yeah. They've dissolved into other things, like you said.
Yep.
But that's very dated. It's not. There's not this hyper rational objectivist kind of deal anymore. Not from that sector. They're just something else now.
Yeah.
So, you think that part of the war we're fighting, we'll say, has a mystical component to it? And honestly, whenever I say mystical war, I'm reminded of the, a couple of things. There's a White Zombie lyric that's like "Into the Psychic War," and then there's Veterans of the Psychic Wars by Blue Oyster Cult. Obviously, I'm saying obviously. Nobody listening to this knows who the fuck Blue Oyster Cult even is, but I'm old.
No clue, except for the cowbell thing.
Yeah, and they'll know Godzilla, and that's about it.
Yeah, that's it. Anyway, I forgot where I was going. Oh, so this is a mystical war in some sense. Now, I've also heard you make the argument that a lot of institutions of power, and also Hollywood, which is saying the same thing, are run by cults. Is this kind of what you mean by the mystical war? Is there a war of cults in some sense?
Yeah.
That runs everything behind the scenes, like sort of the hidden hand.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think, ironically, one of the best best but lowest key examples of this. Are you guys familiar with the cartoon Metalocalypse?
I know it. I've only seen an episode or two. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So very funny cartoon. It's about a metal band. Anyway, like this metal band is one of the largest. Like the metal band alone is one of like the largest economies in the world. Just the metal band. Like they're just that great. And so all the world
Death
powers.
Clock.
Yeah, Death Clock. Yeah, and so all the world powers are trying to stop Death Clock, and they're trying to find ways to like off the band and keep them from having just such a tremendous effect on the world. And when they go to like the secret meeting of the powers that be that are trying to stop Death Clock, one of them, it's like a guys in suits, it's the president of the United States and whatever else, but one of them is a Sumerian priest, a guy wearing like the Sumerian garb, like Sumer, Anunnaki, all that.
Whoa!
And
holy shit! You talk about like, what do you call that? Occult messaging or whatever. Holy shit!
Right, super deep cut. I'm like, wow,
well,
that's weird.
It's a pretty absurdist cartoon too.
Yeah. But like, I think with that part, it's so on point. Like that, there is just like, who are these guys listening to? Oh, there's some Sumerian priest, and like who clearly is carried down from some, Sumerian priesthood. Like that kind of hits the nail on the head, I think. In that a lot of these cults now, while some of them, could be more modern concepts, I do think a lot of them are continuations of groups that have been around for an incredibly long time. There's a great book called The Secret Founding of America that I recommend to people. It's not perfect.
Great book.
Great book. And it talks about how like there was really the battle for America wasn't actually the Revolutionary War. It wasn't, George Washington versus King George. It was actually the Catholics versus the Freemasons versus, like a couple of other groups. Okay. And like Protestants and whatever else. And there was genuine a cultural war going on, for like the direction that this new land would go in. And the Freemasons ultimately won. Again, it's not like it stopped necessarily, it is kind of odd. I've always found it odd that, you look at Washington, D.C. and then you look at Vatican City and they look incredibly similar in design. But regardless of that, certainly the Catholic Church is one of these cults, and they have been around for an incredibly long time, obviously. And we could certainly get into conversations if they're a continuation of something from even before, a character of Jesus Christ might have existed. But regardless, yeah, this has been going on for a very long time. To say that somehow it stopped out of nowhere in the 20th century is ludicrous, just because like marketing spin got better, and the media got better at effectively hiding, that these groups are out there and constantly, battling with each other. I mean, even within the Freemasons, like you have there's many different types of Freemasons. In Switzerland, they're different than they are in the rest of the world. You have York Rite, Scottish Rite, whatever, and these people go through at varying times literal civil wars, but you don't know. I mean, you can look it up and you can find out about it, but most people have no idea that this sort of thing is going on. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
Or go ahead, Penguin.
People definitely were aware of these kind of things before, because there was like a strong anti-Freemason movement. There was like an anti-Freemason party and stuff. I don't know anything about it, but clearly that shows that people were like very aware of what this thing is and that it existed.
Yeah, no, it was actually in New Hampshire, like in 1786, there was a massive, like they were terrified that Freemasons were like running everything, I mean, again, people knew this stuff was going on. What do you got, Sick?
So this brought up in my head the other thing I wanted to talk to you about. So that was this was a reminder. So, all right, I'm going to actually take a weird materialist position on this. So, all right, let's rewind back to Sek as a young teenager, and he's screaming about how the Freemasons and the Illuminati, they run the world. They're behind the scenes of everything from Hollywood to politics. It's all the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians and the Illuminati and this and that.
Yeah.
So at a certain point, I had this call it an epiphany, but it was just a slight shift in my perspective on this. And so it's not so much that the Freemasons run the world and are the people in power, but it's the people in power that run the world are Freemasons. Now, that sounds like I'm saying nothing, but okay, let's go back to the Bavarian Illuminati. What type of person at that time could afford to be a member of the Illuminati and get a classical liberal education, have the means to sit around in a think tank all the time? Who was it? Upper middle, very upper class aristocrats, right?
Sure.
So couple this with another point. When I am comfortable monetarily, I start to look for things outside of myself. I want to invest myself in the community and, find other things and that benefit the work, things around me, and do various charitable works and et cetera. As soon as my money is right, as long as my money's good and I'm taken care of, I start looking for things beyond my own personal monetary gain.
Yeah.
Well, these people that are in elite classes are the same as me. They just have more fucking money. Yeah. So once they get to a certain point where you got more money than God, you start to look for things bigger than yourself. So that's it. That leads you into things like weird fraternal orders and trying to remake the fucking world in your image and whatever. So it's not so much that I don't think Freemasons run the world, but the people that run the world, the elite classes of people, are just like us in the sense that they want to go change the fucking world or join fraternal orders or communities or whatever the thing. And so at the time of the Illuminati, you had a bunch of rich kids basically who wanted to do all these grandiose plans and make this fraternal order and whatever the thing. And so I had a point and I lost it, but basically it's the class of people that would be attracted to things like that, like the Freemasons or like the Rosicrucians or like the Shriners or the Illuminati. It's they are the ones that would be in the position to be able to join fraternal orders like that, or actually make change on a giant social engineering plans. So it's not even so much that they're guided by the mysticism so much. It's that they have the money and power, and then because they have all the money and power that they could ever want in a million lifetimes, they look for things like some sort of weird community where they can rub elbows with other rich people, and that ends up being things like the Freemasons or the Illuminati, or pick your poison, the Thule Society in Nazi Germany, whatever the thing is. So what do you think about that? Does that make
Well,
sense?
real quick.
Or
Go ahead.
Real quick, it seems like that's just, it's almost like it's just the fraternal societies for that class of people, which is what you're saying. That basically there are fraternal societies, throughout society, throughout different classes, for the working class, for the craftsmen, for the this and the that, and this is that for basically the elites.
Yeah,
basically.
So let's talk about the Illuminati for a second, and this I think will kind of answer your question, Sec. I don't think the Illuminati were bad people. I don't think that in fact, even largely, like if you look up, especially from conspiracy theorists, what the goals were for the Illuminati, I don't think most egoists or libertarians.
I have similar goals. Yeah, no,
right,
I have similar goals to
exactly.
Illuminati. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, well, sure, that's great. Like
actually, Brian, since I haven't delved as deep into this, and listen to these conversations as such, and for the sake of our listeners, maybe can you go into kind of what the origins of the actual Illuminati are?
It's basically classical liberalism.
With the concept. I mean, and I know I can tell the name is, I guess, Italian for illuminated, and other than that, besides the popular vague conception of the Illuminati, the elites controlling the world from the top, from the heights of society. What are actually the Illuminati proper? I know you recently mentioned the Bavarian Illuminati and stuff.
Let me see if I can remember, because it's been a long time. But they wanted to democratize society. They wanted universal suffrage. They wanted to eliminate the church as a institutional power and remove it from politics. A couple other things. Generally, like classical liberal tenets. There's nothing crazy about the original Illuminati.
Yeah.
What place and what time?
This would be originally in Germany or Bavaria.
Right. Yeah, so we're talking like the 18th century when this would start, okay? And you have a particular figure
before the French Revolution.
Yeah, because the main figure here would be Adam Weishaupt, who
was friends with Jefferson, by the way.
What's that?
Adam Weishaupt was friends with Thomas Jefferson, by the way.
Yeah. So he was born in like 1750, somewhere around there, 1750, 1740, something. And he would live until about 1830. In fact, Robert Anton Wilson would have a funny conspiracy theory that Adam Weishaupt was actually George Washington. Or turn that around. Anyway, whatever. So Adam Weishaupt who not uninterestingly, was trained as a young person, as a Jesuit. Would later become a Freemason, and through Freemasonry, and this speaks to what Sec was talking about, through Freemasonry, you would get this fraternity, right? And you would have these very wealthy guys, as many Freemasons were at the time, because they were the ones that actually had the time and ability to have secret meetings at whatever lodge they happened to do this at. And Adam Weishaupt would essentially say, well, Freemasonry isn't necessarily enough. And there's understanding for that, because a lot of lodges would still have to pay fealty to whatever monarchy existed at the time to some degree. And Weishaupt, and this was really the goal of and Sec, headed a lot of this, Weishaupt, or the Illuminati, the Bavarian Illuminati, which is really the start of the Illuminati as we understand it, is kind of still gets talked about by conspiracy theorists today. His whole, it seems like their whole thing was, we need to get rid of the monarchy. We want to be able to rise to the highest heights, but because we don't have royal blood, or because we're not in the church or whatever, we can't do that. And so they wanted to level they didn't want to, I know everybody loves thinking of the Illuminati as being like, the one eye in the pyramid. They wanted to level the pyramid. They really did. The one goal, I don't think I could spew out all of their goals right off the top of my head here. But the one goal that some people want to take umbrage with, that I understand, is the idea that they wanted compulsory education for children away from the family. there's some nuance and debate around that one, and certainly I wouldn't really, I would take umbrage with that as well. But it's not like they wanted to. I think what happens is that a lot of Christians read, like Weishaupt or Illuminati conspiracy stuff about how they're against the family. The thing is, they're not like against the family. They're against family lineage. They're against family lines, because that's what leads to monarchy. And that was that was their problem with that. Okay.
Well, it seems like
go ahead.
They're early bourgeois liberals, like basically as Sec implied, and so they're coming up against the vestiges, or like the vestiges of, no, this is still in the time of some absolute monarchy for sure. So they're in an age of absolute monarchy and various types of monarchies and noble aristocracies and stuff, vestiges of feudalism, I should say. So but long after the actual medieval period. But that area where there was a large bourgeois, there was the beginning of the scientific revolution and rational thought and liberal ideas, and they're coming into that classic, I guess, 18th century kind of class conflict between the upstart bourgeois and the actual nobility. And I guess people that aren't familiar with, I guess, history from that period, when they hear the term bourgeois, they might be familiar of Marxist class theory from the subsequent century, not realizing the bourgeois were the upstarts. Certainly the people that own the means of production in the 19th century, in the age of industrialization, and past really the age of monarchies and absolutism. But in this period of time, of course, this was kind of when that class balance was shifting away from hereditary nobility and also from not medieval ideas, but kind of what was left of medieval ideas and from the Renaissance period and stuff.
Yeah. So you have, this is stuff that all comes out of the Enlightenment, not unlike the American Revolution, not unlike the French Revolution, not unlike, the world was changing.
That's the word I was missing, the Enlightenment. Yeah.
Yeah. In the 18th century, like all of this stuff is coming out of that. And one of the key points to come out of the Enlightenment, and you can read this in the writings of Francis Bacon, even his posthumous ones like the New Atlantis, was that, we understand how the universe works now, and we can make a perfect society. Okay. Now that's not even necessarily new. The Romans had some very similar ideas about like perfect societies. In fact, there's even one emperor who wanted to create a little province where they had this Neoplatonic perfect city.
There you go. Platonic. I was going to say Greeks.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, Neoplatonism is a huge deal. That could be a whole episode on its own, but anyway, so the Illuminati, come out of this, and I think that, and I'm trying to remember exactly what Sec's question was about the whole matter. But the point being is that this was a group, this was a cult that wanted power for itself, and it did whatever it needed to level the playing field and allow them to rise in power. Did they succeed? Yeah, I think so, because outside of Britain, not many of us are given two shits about any royalty, in the world. And well, anyway, we could talk about the Windsors all day long too. That's a whole other, situation. But what do you got, Sec?
The House of Saxe-Gotha. Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
So we might be agreeing here. So so the intended reasons for starting that group, you and I don't think anybody here would necessarily disagree with, right?
I would have joined up in a heartbeat. Yeah,
sure. Here's the thing. So at that time, okay, this might be just a problem with organization. It's like organization theory. So like, in order to actually make the changes that they wanted to see in the way that they wanted to do so, like through like political means, you need political power. And again, what class of people were all these people? They're wealthy elites. Most of them are the sons of wealthy elites. So they had the power to actually execute these things. And I think you're right. I think they had played a part in eroding the power of the monarchies in Europe.
Mhm.
I think the pinnacle of that being World War One, when all the monarchies of Europe. So here's the thing, like, okay, let me give you a different examples to kind of like Lenin and Trotsky wanted to uplift the proletariat and all sorts of things, and that was their stated goals. But what actually happened when they got into power is an entirely fucking different thing, right?
Right.
So they might have started this and this happens with organizations all the time. I think it's called Krieger's Law, if I remember correctly. So, like, eventually, when an organization becomes a certain size and power, it becomes more about furthering the organization rather than the stated goals of the organization. And then you see this happen a lot. So I think a similar thing happened with the Illuminati is once they sort of use their power and influence they kind of forgot, maybe, I don't even know if they forgot, but the reasons why they created the organization in the first place were secondary to furthering the organization itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because we don't have, like, the church still has a lot of power. The people have less power than they probably ever have, right? So it's like they're not entirely exercising or not entirely bringing into fruition the original stated goals, right?
Yeah, I think they fell off the mark, like, or fell off the rails, ran off the rails. There we go, ran off the rails a long time ago. And this happens. I mean, and like you said, kind of like Krieger's law, like this just happens by nature. For example, like are there things that could be called mystical that could help you, say, become more wealthy? Yes, like that could bring you more money. Yes. What often happens though when someone actually becomes more wealthy is that because look, like wealth and money, I mean, this stuff's like, it's invisible, or I mean, it's not invisible. Like it doesn't really exist. It's an idea. It's a shared concept. It's a shared idea, right? It's a very mental thing, even though it has real world effects. We all kind of know it's BS. Like Bitcoin kind of called that ball, like Bitcoin just said, yeah, if you think about money hard enough, everything can be money. So it's both everything and nothing. Now when a person, like, say, goes through this process, through the mentality or whatever, to get to that point, what happens is they become very comfortable, right? In fact, for a quick cultural reference, you lose the eye of the tiger. Okay. When you actually get the power, like, you lose the hunger and for what it took to keep it. And when that happens, like, decadence can settle in, and I don't mean the good kind of decadence. And you ultimately end up, like, fear creeps in. And this is unfortunately incredibly abbreviated because there's a lot to talk about around this whole thing that has to do with mindset and not the law of attraction, but maybe something that people would think was similar. Anyway, like,
I'm talking about grind set.
What is it?
I'm talking about grind set.
Grind set. There you go. Yeah, right. I like that, grind set. Yeah. And so, right. So what ends up happening is, okay, you achieve your goals. Like, let's say the Illuminati achieve their goals, and then it's like, well, then what? And then all it becomes about is just harboring and trying to keep that power. And when you're doing that, that comes with a sense of fear. And so I think, you're even if your goals were noble, they get perverted and twisted by the fear of losing what you've gained. And I mean, you could see this with, everybody talks about this with, like, I don't know, some guy has a rags to riches story, becomes an insane billionaire. They have kids, and the kids just take the wealth for granted and don't think twice about it. And they don't have the same respect for what it took, that grind set. They don't have that. And so they end up becoming, I don't know, Hunter Biden or something, who knows, whatever. But point being that these, like, we're talking about descendants of these groups who have forgotten perhaps the whole reason that it started, what it took to get there, and really are just all about staying in power now. And when you're trying to stay in power, a lot of times people will do just about anything, lie, cheat, steal, the whole business. So I don't know if I'm like, I mean, this is kind of stuff that I don't think I've ever really said out loud before. So I hope I'm doing an okay job in explaining it. But does anyone have any thoughts on any of that?
We're all getting accused of being Illuminati shills, just for the record. That's gonna happen.
Yeah. I mean, I'm covering one eye here. I'm right on. I mean, I'm a Jew already, so I've been screwed my whole life.
I know he's a Jew. He's promoting the
fall of Western
Illuminati,
civilization.
the fall of Western civilization. I'm telling you, he might be a reptile too. I don't know.
Oh boy,
Illuminati confirmed.
Illuminati confirmed. No, but I think this is a more balanced and nuanced take of sort of elite analysis, and even taking into account and being open to the idea that cults and secret societies rule the world. I think this is much better than, I don't know, pick your conspiracy person who's like, oh, they run everything and this and that and whatever. And even if there's definitely truth to that, but I think we here right now are having a much more balanced and nuanced take than most that would entertain these ideas, we'll say.
Yeah, I mean, I want to just say quick, and I've said this many times on my own show. I mean, the single most important takeaway that I ever want anybody to have from these kind of conversations is there is no new world order. There might be new world orders. There might be plural. There might be groups, multiple groups that want to achieve different goals, but that look kind of the same in the end. But there's not just like one group that's doing all like that. That's insane, and there's no logic to that either. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, because speaking of new world, one agenda.
Sure.
Right.
There's clearly not just one agenda. Yeah.
Yeah. No.
So people talk about the New World Order as if it's a group, and it's not. It never was. I don't know where that came from. So if you go back and you search,
it's a wrestling show.
Yeah, right. It was
Yeah.
Hulk Hogan. It was Scott Hall, Kevin Nash. Exactly.
No, it's a paradigm shift in some sense. It's a new it's the post-war era. Okay, so previously during wars in Europe.
Before you go on, when did it get on the dollar bill? Novum Ordo Seclorum or what? No, Novo Ordo Seclorum or whatever. New World Order in Latin.
That's a Masonic thing. That's been on the. I don't know how long that's been on the dollar, but a long time.
And of course, the Illuminati pyramid. I mean, that's
sure.
Yeah.
But the term New World Order. Okay, so previous to World War I, the elites in Europe would have wars with each other, and it was no big deal, right? They'd send the peasants to go fight. A lot of times, they were the monarchs or whoever else, the nobles or whatever. They would send their peasants to go fight each other just because they were getting too uppity, right? So there was not really as much of a chance, especially coming up towards World War I, of your entire city being firebombed and all your wealth evaporating, right?
Yeah, I mean, often it was actually just nobles and maybe
out in open fields,
middle class.
Stuff. Yeah,
often there were no peasants even involved. Sometimes they didn't even want. A lot of the times in the medieval period, they didn't even want peasants involved. It was literally, the privilege and I guess duty of nobility just to go fight, and they would leave the farming peasants out of it as much as possible.
Sorry, I didn't mean peasants. I meant lower classes. We'll say lower classes.
Yeah. But you could also have peasant levies and stuff. But yeah, no, that definitely changed throughout the entire. I mean, they had to invent nationalism before nationalism. I don't even think people understand it. Before nationalism not being the concept of people for some reason seem to make an equivalency between nationalism and fascism for some reason. But nationalism is just the idea that people actually believe they're part of a nation that has things in common. Didn't exist before the 1820s, 30s, 40s for the most part. Certainly the idea that I always saw it was really interesting. A big critique of the movie Braveheart, which is one of the most historically inaccurate pieces of garbage in that sense ever made. The idea that all those people would care that they were Scottish and being impressed by English, they wouldn't give a damn because they have no concept of that. They live by the clans. They have no concept of a Scottish nation, and neither did anybody on this earth because there were city states, and maybe there was a democratic city state of Athens, and there were maybe hints at the concept, but the idea of of nationalism was necessary for basically the entirety of the modern, not the early modern, but the modern state.
Yeah, it really came about in like the late 1800s was like when you saw the rise of the actual like a nation state.
Yeah, I mean the nations were based on, it was the nation of the ruler and his vassal, nobles. It was you didn't give a, it was just another, if you were a president, it was just another, guy on horseback with fancy jewelry on. And if he came and somebody else's army came in, it'd be a different guy you had to pay your 40% of your grain to.
Right, like France and Germany, like they weren't nation states till like the late 1800s, and before that, it was just like a collection of like city states. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
through a great centralization and stamping out of like, dozens of local languages and dialects that are in some cases completely lost to history, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, like nationalism comes out of, a lot of it comes out of the concept of citizenship. Citizenship, had a rise and actually finally meant something in ancient Rome, but then you had the Dark Ages, and effectively this idea wouldn't come back until Napoleon, and everybody was running off of Napoleon's Art of War as far as their rule book, and that leads to this idea of nationalism and citizenship and all that.
Really,
you guys are totally right.
Fascinated. Yeah. I am fascinated by this whole period because there's so much I mean, obviously there's a bit I know, but there's so much I don't know about that.
And Prussia ramped it up.
What was Napoleon's deal? Was he an Illuminati? I mean, did they have an opinion of him?
Was he not a Rosicrucian? Wait a minute, hold on.
So, I mean, what I will say is Napoleon was definitely a mystic, and his very infamous stop in Egypt, had a lot going for it. And I think he admits as much as he wants to admit, but he had an experience at the pyramids. And I do think it was like a mystical one. And he suggests as much as well in his own writings. But I mean, Napoleon came up with so many wild ideas. I mean, you think of, for example, like we were talking about why people went to war. I know we're kind of off of sex point, but just quick, why would people even be willing, why would the nobility or why would anybody be willing to go to war? Now, normally when the nobility would go to war, they'd be given title, lands, all kinds of stuff, right? Like really tangible things. Napoleon figured out that no, you don't have to give them anything. Just give them these medals that make them look impressive to women. And these guys will go and they'll die free all day long.
Oh, and yeah, so, they did do a lot of medals. Yeah.
Right. So that's his, and you can kind of read about this in actually War is a Racket by Smedley Butler. He talks about this with Napoleon as well. That the idea that, medals were enough and rank was enough, that's wholly out of Napoleon's playbook. And everybody basically copied him. And, let's be clear, Napoleon was the most successful, as far as conqueror, was the most successful conqueror outside of Alexander the Great. I mean, we think of him as a loser because of Waterloo, but quite the opposite. This guy was owning ass, for most of his life. And came up with a lot. I mean, there's a reason he was able to do that. And that's because he really innovated a lot in the, both the art of war. And I mean, he also, kind of wrote a book about it, but yeah. So
what was
his, what do you got?
Angle? What was his, real quick, what was his angle? What was he, transformed the legal codes and governance structures of Europe? Was he, I mean, he wasn't a revolutionary. He was part of the counter revolution, I guess, but what was his angle?
He was a revolution within the form. He was absolutely a revolution within the form. He almost single-handedly created what we would call the corporate body or the modern nation state.
Yes,
he is the
100%.
beginning of the nation state. And yes, that was a counter revolution, but I mean, I would say so was the Constitution in the United States. But Napoleon was absolutely the proto nation state, and then the Prussians, who lost to him, mirrored him, and a lot of what because they lost, they mirrored Napoleon and ramped it up to 11. And I think a lot of what we saw after that was actually based off of the Prussian model of the modern nation state.
Yeah, I mean, it was Rome repeated. It really was ancient Rome, just in full repeat. Because remember, he started off as the consul for the French Republic. And it wasn't until much later in his life that he said, "Oh, make me the emperor." Like that. The idea of him becoming emperor, that wasn't originally part of the plan. or at least it wasn't his original thinking back in the day. He was all about, French Republic. I mean, it all sounded, I mean, that's part of why his ideas sold, right? Because it sounded like it was going to help the common person. But then, power corrupts.
So on the Freemason thing, there is no documentation about whether he was a Freemason. There is a lot of depictions of him making Masonic symbols, and all of his family was Freemasons. Napoleon, just for the record, just to answer your question, there's no documentation that proves it one way or another. But his wife also was in the Woman's Lodge, and all of his brothers, and it looks like his sons were all Freemasons. So take that for what you want, but and also 22 of his 30 marshals were all Masons as well.
Yeah, I mean, and I will add in, like, again, his expedition to Egypt, yes, there's the deal with Syria and everything, but his expedition to Egypt, I think that had absolutely occult goals behind it. I mean, we could say not unlike the Nazis, but we don't want to go to. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, exactly.
All right, so back to let me finish the New World Order thing.
Yeah.
Real quick. So all right, so World War I happens, and now so there was talk before World War I from various people about creating and it was not for malicious reasons, right? Mm-hmm. It was about creating like international institutions and sort of a homogenized international economic system, mainly so things would like run smoother, right? So after World War I, the elites of Europe were like, holy shit, our wealth just fucking evaporated and was burned to the ground and all this kind of stuff. Like, this is a new kind of warfare, right? That was like destroying, and it was just like nothing the world had ever seen before World War I. Mm-hmm. And the ability to inflict violence and damage was like no other. And so they were watching like their cities burn to the fucking ground and be bombed and whatever, and you had airplanes and whatever else. And so the elites were like, holy shit, no, we can't like have this. Like, it was fine. Warfare was fine before, and we were making good money on warfare before. Now it's actually a threat to us, right? So we need to set up some sort of like mediation system so we can all kind of this doesn't happen kind of again. And you had the League of Nations. It really wasn't for nefarious reasons. It was for somewhat like self-interested reasons in the terms of the elite, but they wanted to set up like a singular economic system and a banking system that would service the whole world and whatever. So, but Cecil, okay, so there's two camps within this. One was the Cecil Rhodes camp, who wanted to reunify Britain and the United States, and the world would be run under what he called the Anglo-American Empire. So the U.S. and the Britain would run the world, and we'd have one. And he's like, we'll uplift the whole world and all this kind of bullshit. And then there was the other one that was like, we should have a world run under something like the United Nations. Now, after World War II, that just happened, right? Like we have more or less. The U.S. and Britain have global hegemony, and also we have an international body that mitigates these things, and also we have an international economic order, right? And we have what's called a liberal, rules-based world order. This already happened. The idea like the New World Order is coming, it already came. It just happened. That's the paradigm that we're in. You know what I mean? It's not a group that's trying to like nefariously bring on world government. It is just the post-war paradigm that we are in. That is what the New World Order is. So when George Bush Sr. was talking about this New World Order or whatever the thing, he's really just referencing like we have an international system. All of these countries are so interlocked and all a part of the same economic system, to where that we can't have a warfare like World War II ever again, or we all fucking suffer, right? Yeah. So that's what the New World Order is. Now, you might say that this is like a good or a bad thing. I happen to think that it is a bad thing, but it's not it's not a secret group that's trying to bring about a certain agenda. There's probably people that are trying to further this paradigm and make it more true, but it already happened. It happened after World War I, and it happened even more. It was cemented after World War II, and that's just where we are in history. Is this new world order?
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. No, well, I want to add in. I mean, because a lot, and I think this is very unfair for people to do, because they will say, and you can pick your generation. Everybody blames the last generation, but really, especially in like libertarian anarchist circles, there's a lot of blame on like the bulk of the people of the 20th century. Why didn't you do anything to stop this from happening? And I think there's a lack of understanding as to why people didn't necessarily stop it. Yes, there were vocal anti-war groups even during World War I, very vocal ones, in fact, that basically history wants to try and erase, or those who write the history books want to try and erase. But, you know, you're coming out of, with the beginning of the 20th century, okay, you are coming out of what's called, at least in the US and other parts of the world, called the gay 90s. Now, doesn't mean everybody was, you know, butt fucking. Would be fine if they were, but the gay 90s, okay, it's called that because it's happy, right? It was such an amazing time. Or in Britain, they called it the naughty 90s. Like life was incredible in the 1890s. Like not uninterestingly, much like the 1990s, or you know, that we recently experienced. Life was pretty damned amazing. So a lot of these things happen out of that. People are like, wow, this is incredible. And they think that their leaders are behind it because that's just the way of thinking, you know, part of the reason people dealt with feudalism for so long. And so, you know, even if these ideas, and you know, one of the classic books, even though it has plenty of problems, G. Edward Griffin's, you know, Creature on Jekyll Island, right? You know, he pulls from open documents where these guys were telling you what they were going to do. Like, it wasn't even you know, it wasn't like even that hidden. Right. In fact, I could even imagine myself, I'm going to incriminate myself again. I could imagine myself being on Jekyll Island in, you know, whatever, 1911, 1913 or something, and listening to these guys and being like, oh, yeah, guys, great idea. You want to bring everybody up. You want the world to be this great and blah, blah, blah. It probably would have sounded even attractive to, you know, to me. So the idea, and I love what you're bringing up here, Sec, ultimately, is the idea that somehow this was all meant to be malicious, that this was all bad. I'm not saying it couldn't have been, kind of like we were talking about earlier, how these things get perverted over time. That clearly happened, I think. But, you know, it was coming out of what people saw a lot of positive change, and compared to the previous 100 years, it sure as fuck was positive change. And so they're like, yeah, let's keep trying. Let's keep going. This experimentation, this new way of living is really working. It is taking us out of, you know, like 99% poverty, right? Like, I mean, it's taking us out of the, you know, the mud pits and everything. Like this is phenomenal. So yeah, why didn't people stop this? Because it was so much better than what they knew. Life was so much better at the time than what they had known previously. So of course they were accepting of it. And it's kind of hard to blame them for that, and to not have the foresight of Skynet appearing in the future, you know, like why would they think that? You know, life was great. And yeah, you wanted stability after World War I, and you wanted all of this. Anyway, what else we got?
No, I think you're right. And it's just, you know, at the end of the day, the problem resides in that there's people with enough power to make these things happen in the first place,
Mm-hmm.
like good or bad, right? It's like, if you have like a group of people who have the ability to make plans or agendas, good or bad, that can change the fucking world, this is a problem. Like, it's always going to be a problem. You know, the power is going to corrupt eventually. So, even if they have the best of intention to begin with, that's going to change once they you know, start exercising their power, or their, like you said, their children come to power, or whatever the thing. So, and then here we are, and I think that's been human history for at least the last, you know, 9,000-10,000 years. So, let's how much more time you got, Brian?
Yeah, I could go a little longer. I could go maybe another 20-30 minutes.
Okay. What does all right, let's circle back to the mystical war. Like, what is that? Could you elaborate like on that? What does that look like, and what are the factions at play, I guess?
Sure. Well, I mean, there's probably next to, I mean, the best term for how many factions are in play, I would say countless. That doesn't mean that there's that many, but who really knows? Because if they've done it right, like the old saying, what's the best conspiracy? The one you don't know about. And that should always be the answer. So there's plenty of groups, I'm sure, that are out there that will never know the names, will never know that they're a thing, because they've been doing it right for anywhere from the past 5 years to 500, or 5,000 even, who knows. With the mystical war, I think.
Let me interrupt you one real quick.
Yeah, please.
I'm gonna bolster your point, because I was screaming about the Freemasons as a young lad, and then like a few years later, I saw like a bunch of like biographies or episode series on the History Channel about the Freemasons, and I'm like, no, I was wrong. There's no way. Like, if they're talking about it on the fucking History Channel, there's nothing going on there. You know what I mean? Like, there would if I was right about the Freemasons running everything, they wouldn't be talking about it on the History Channel. So whoever's actually running things, I don't know their name, because,
right.
You know what I mean? So like, there's no way that those two things can't be true. So I had to like sort of drop and refigure what I was actually thinking there,
Yeah. I think in general, you only find out about these groups after they've won. Part of the reason the Illuminati, I think, was successful in a lot of its goals. And again, its goals were not, like, the winning doesn't have to be, we converted the entire world or something like that, is that we know about them now. Well, also, I mean, they were part of like the electorate in Germany anyway, so it's not like you wouldn't have known. They weren't that secret. But regardless, yes, your point is right on. I think usually if you do know about it, it's usually because they either won, maybe it could be because they lost, but bottom line is they either won or they're out of power, whatever that happens to be. So what a lot of this, I mean, and you can be an open group though, and that actually speaks to the Catholic Church, because I think a lot of power ultimately comes down to attention. And I don't think that it's not a coincidence that much of the technology we deal with right now is all about stealing our attention. Much of everything getting churned out in our present economy is about taking your attention away. It's about keeping you from thinking about and it doesn't have to be malicious. It could be something as simple as something I love. It could be about Star Wars, right? Like, I mean, there's so much Star Wars shit that comes out every freaking day. Like, if you want to see everything Star Wars, like, all right, say goodbye to your life, and my point in that is power comes from what you give your attention to. That doesn't even have to be mystical. That could be a very, scientific materialist idea, but I would argue there's mystical aspects to it as well. And I mean, we could pull quotes from Nikola Tesla, from all kinds of people about this, but anyway, we won't go there for this. Like, part of the reason I think the Catholic Church still exists is because it is an open organization that effectively does harvest the attention and thought of, over 1 billion people around the world. So it's still here. As to where other groups, not so much, and even like, say, with the Freemasons, why didn't the Freemasons, like, part of it has to do with being a secret society. But anyway, this is tough stuff to talk about. But my point is that so much of today is about stealing your attention towards something, whether it's to buy a Toyota, just to bring. And I do think that there are groups, but like, some of the things that people attribute to like a new world order really could just be some, like, agency wanting to sell Toyotas. And that's really all that it comes down to. Not all of this has to be malicious. Some people have very simple goals, even though they figure out, shall we say, the mystical concepts that allow them to, or that will, bring the end result that they want. So as far as like the groups out there, again, like, I don't know that there is like a singular group that's trying to like conquer the entire planet, like to run the entire world. There's books I've talked about in previous Into the Void episodes that I think have tremendous historical research behind them, that do suggest there are groups that, like, their goal is they want to make the entire planet Earth. They need to make the entire planet Earth presentable to their God, whoever that God happens to be, so that God will finally come down and sit with them and give them the, mystical nobility that would allow them to have the life that they've always wanted, or, whatever that happens to be. So
You mean like
what
the
do we got on that?
Protestant?
Yeah, right. Yeah, Protestants. I mean, Jews get levied at this one too, like with the Messianic age and whatever. But yeah, the Protestant. Yeah. So the argument ultimately for me that I think I brought up earlier, and again, this is a subject I really have not spent a ton of time talking about. So, the first time it's like when you have this theory percolating in your head, or you have this collection of data percolating in your head, and you've never said it before, and it just comes out like word vomit. I kind of feel like that's what I'm going through at the moment, because this is stuff that, oh yeah, I've been reading about it, thinking about it forever. But as far as like laying it out, yeah.
Welcome to my life every time. Like I have
right.
I have a ton of shit that I've been going over in my head and reading up on, and then when I try to talk about it, it's just a fucking jumble fuck.
Yeah,
because it's so much information that, like, you didn't come to these conclusions like from one set of information, right? You came to these conclusions from like a vast variety of different, material and resources and whatever else. So it's like, well, I got to tell you about this, and then I got to tell you about that. I have to tell you about this other thing and this other thing, and like you don't know how to like explain this theory in a cohesive way, and that's just fucking my life. I don't know what to, it's just welcome to.
Yeah, I'm going through it right here as well. And so I appreciate the empathy on it. Yeah, I guess so there are groups who have shared goals, and I think they have somewhat of an understanding of the power that individuals have within this universe, which can be called mysticism. I always love to quote Heinlein from Stranger in a Strange Land with "Thou art God." And they recognize that they can be more powerful working together to achieve their goals. But not only that, they're more powerful if they garner the attention and, I'll say, effectively the thoughts of others around them, to help them achieve their goals. So like if you're concentrating, let's say, I don't know, let's just toss this out there for an example. I'm not saying it's 100% accurate, but let's toss this out for example. Disney, let's say Disney has some wild esoteric occult goals. I think there's actually a lot of good evidence for this. But what Disney really needs to achieve that is not only their own actions and their own money, they need more of civilization, more people, more of these "thou art gods," more of these, like concentrating on what they are interested in, what they want. And whether that's just like you loving what they're putting out there, and so you give them more money, or just thinking about it more, whatever, like you're helping create, kind of these aims. You're co-creating with them in a very real way. This is why it's so important to be ever vigilant with what with your attention, with what you give your attention to. And I think like advertisers, marketers, behavioral economists, and everything, like they've known this for an incredibly long time, and they use it in simple ways, you could say, to make money, but you could also use it in ways to change culture and to change the world. And again, that doesn't even have to be mystical, but I do think that there's a mystical aspect to it. So what do you got, Zach?
No, real quick, let me back you up a little bit here. Okay, so a way I've put this to specifically anarchists in the past is I've actually left out like the mystical aspects of this, or magical workings, or psychic vampires, or whatever the thing that you want to call, right? So the way I've presented this before is it's not enough that we are actively against these people, politicians, financial elites, the wealthy class, the owner class, whatever. It's not enough that we're actively against these people, because these people just want your attention. So they want your attention either in support of them, or they want your attention, like spending all your time talking about how much you hate these people and what they're doing today, and oh, look at this other thing, bad thing they did, and whatever else. Right. They want, it's just spell my name right. As long as you get all news is good news. just spell my name right. They want your attention either way, whether you're living your life or like defining your personality in your opposition to these people, or your what did I just say? You're defining yourself in your support of these people by being obedient. They just want your attention. So your best course of action as an anarchist is to actually somewhat ignore all of these people and what they're doing, and do what you want to do in your own life and what benefits you solely for that reason. So like if you start living your life and just spend all of your time in your opposition to these people, you're still giving them your attention, you're still giving them your energy, you're still living your life for these people, right? And
what you
honestly,
resist persists. I mean, that's the classic line.
Yes. So you have to, we as anarchists cannot define ourselves like in our opposition to the state or the greater state, the owners, the politicians, all this stuff. We can't define ourselves in our opposition to them either. We cannot be in support or in opposition. We just can't grant our attention to these people at all. And the reason I started saying this is for the reasons that you're laying out, is I do think there's a mystical or spiritual component to this. And I think they do in certain ways, either both materially and also spiritually, they feed off of our attention and our emotions as well. But I don't even have to go that far. I can just put it in a very practical sense, is you're going to inflate these people's ego just by paying attention to them. And that's what really gives them their power. Right. So I just I've always explained it that way. I just left off the mysticism because I don't want to have to explain that.
No, totally. I mean, if people wanted like a real world economic example, I'm kind of notorious for being a video gamer. I mean, I'll give you a very quick example in video games. And I've talked about this on my show before, and I've always given them a lot of credit for this. Nintendo literally does not care what Sony or Microsoft does, what the Xbox or the PlayStation is doing. They do not care. And they are the ones that have not been affected. If anything, they've only their share prices, their profitability has only increased since the pandemic, as to where that is not true for the other gaming companies. It's because they don't care. They don't pay attention to anything else. All they care about is doing what they are doing. And that, and I think that's a very real world example of when you focus, when you truly focus, you can achieve the game or the ends that you want. But again, I like you just said, I think that there is more of a mystical component to that, and I wouldn't be surprised if the Japanese would be aware of it as well. So, this is you're really hitting at it. That except it, to me, and again, I'm making statements that are the horse or the cart so far ahead of the horse, but whatever, we'll put them out there. Except that you are an incredibly powerful being, if you want to call yourself a god, whatever, but you are an incredibly powerful being. And you giving your energy to anyone or anything else comes at a cost to you. Now, you can do things with gratitude, but that's out of your own desire. Like if you want to help somebody, that's a very different thing, because you are, this is a choice that you are making. Like that's your egoist talking, right? That's your unique talking. It's not where somebody is like you said, psychic vampire kind of taking away from you. So it's sort of my number one concern. And one of the things of why I'm willing to finally get into, because I can, on my show, I can say all day long, like, look, the color red on your smartphone, the reason the notifications are red is because you're evolutionarily wired to pay attention to that color. They are using gambling tactics against you. They are using the worst possible tricks that they can to just get you engaging more and more and spending more money, whoever it is, Facebook, Google, Apple, name the company. They're doing it all against you. I can bring that up and it just doesn't stop anything. People just don't care. They don't get it. Why this is so bad to give up on your attention, especially when they say, oh, and my life is shit. Well, no shit, because you're not living, man. Like you're living for all these other companies. You're living for all these other people, and you're not actively engaged in the creation of your own life. And I don't think that people understand, like, part of the reason I wanted to start espousing Kabbalah so much and espousing spirituality is because people don't get that there is that entire layer of it, which is the part that brings into your life what you actually want, not what somebody else tells you that you want. And this is something that can genuinely, like, I think, bring down the authoritarianism that's around you, or at the very least, make the authoritarianism scared of you. And really, I believe that's genuinely possible. So yeah, that's cart way ahead of the horse, but it's an important point to bring up.
So one way that certain people have put it is it's you're existing in a and I hate the way they use this because they use it to talk down to people, right? But you're existing in a lower frequency when you're basically you're reactive
Yes.
to other people or stimuli around you. You're not exercising high vibrations, as the new age hipsters put it, right? But
Yep.
there is some truth to that. Now, this is often used to like sort of look down on people, and I'm not really into that, but because everyone is guilty of this. I mean, every one of us, even us sitting here, are guilty of this. You get sucked into whatever the thing, or what, you go down a rabbit hole, or you figure out you just spent 6 hours watching YouTube videos on whatever fucking volcanoes or whatever, you know what I mean? And so it's like everybody is guilty of this, and there's no shame in that at all. It's just like recognizing like what that is and trying to make exercise or make decisions that are based on what you actually want and not what you're influenced or what somebody trying to get your attention is sort of making you do. And I don't know how far I want to get into that, but in doing that has consequences down the road that you cannot necessarily see right away. And some might call this like a magical working, and in some sense it is, but trying to exercise your will and manifest it on reality will have positive consequences eventually. Now, you could make a mystical reasoning for that, but you could also just make a very material, like the more you think and focus on things that you want to see and work towards those things, and obviously eventually you're going to make progress towards those things. If you want to take a mystical route, well, your brain is literally manifesting your will upon higher planes of existence, which is manifesting onto our current material reality. And either way, it's the same fucking difference, to some degree. Is like just being very conscious of where you're putting your attention and what you are working towards, and is it actually serving you? And that, to bring it back to sort of Sterner, are these things actually serving you? Is this what you actually want, or is this just kind of what you've been told that you want, or is this just hitting some lower dopamine receptors in your brain, and it's kind of tricking you into thinking it's what you want, when really it's just sort of like short-term chemical surges in your brain, right?
Yeah.
So you're right. This is, I get what you're saying. This is like a whole, it's impossible to put this into like a short conversation to try to explain this concept, but without sounding like a rambling idiot,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cause like, I'd love to talk about like sigils. Like these are, that'd be a fantastic part to add on to this conversation. But it's a lot to get into. I mean, I guess if I was going to briefly talk about this, just to add some color to, what exactly does this mystical war look like? So sigil is really just a symbol. Okay. And now to understand what I'm talking about with your attention. So your thought, now we can measure a thought. We know thoughts, like it's a thing. It's energy. Like thoughts are measurable. All right. And they are going out. Your thoughts are really just you impressing upon what I call the formless substance of the universe. What is that formless substance? Huge subject. We're not going to get into that here, but anyway. So your thoughts that you impress.
It's a conscious being. That's what it is.
Yeah, I mean, really, yeah, exactly. The formless substance is kind of the the blood flow of the superorganism that is the universe, which we've talked about that before in previous Into the Voids. Okay, there we go. How about that? So, okay. So anyway, so your thoughts you impress. Now, a sigil is created by you writing out, I don't know, like an X with a line through it or something along whatever that happens to be. Okay, whatever the symbol looks like that you created. This is your sigil. Now you're going to impress your thoughts, and the thoughts you're impressing upon that sigil while you're concentrating on it are, say, your goals. Your goals could be, I don't know, I want a new car or something. Okay, whatever. Or I want to sell 10,000 cars. How about that? Because I think used car salesmen are really great at this. But anyway, so this sigil, like you're going to concentrate on that, and you're going to, and it could be even more than a symbol. It could be like a ritual that gets done. Now, here's the thing. So you're impressing that upon the superorganism that is the universe. Nobody needs to know, nobody else besides you. In fact, the argument would go by a lot of, mystics in the past that you don't want other people to know what your sigil is. Why? Because it disempowers that sigil. Okay. Nobody has to know what it means, but if you put it out in front of people, say during the Super Bowl or during the Video Music Awards or the Grammys or whatever, and you put out that ritual or you put out that symbol or whatever, and you put that out there, and you get so many people watching because, we all got to watch the Super Bowl, or we all got to watch this or whatever, and they all concentrate on that. It doesn't matter if they don't know what the fuck it means. Okay. The point is their attention is upon it. And that measurable thing that is thoughts of human beings is getting impressed upon that and giving it more power. And thus a greater chance for it to become true. And the person ends up selling 10,000 more cars, whatever the case may be. Now, I know all of that sounds nuts. Okay. Or might sound nuts to a lot of people, but there is a method behind all of that that makes an odd amount of sense that we can't get into entirely in this episode whatsoever. But for some color, again, of what this mystical war looks like, that's part of what it looks like and speaks to the importance of having control of your own, of your attention, of where your attention, what you focus on. And it also explains why, there's the phrase, the attention wars. Okay. Like this is a common phrase today. Why are people talking about that? Because they recognize, maybe not mystically, but they recognize that this is something validly going on, and it is antithetical to your own growth as an individual. What do you got, Zach?
Just to kind of like put this in, give you like a real simple example.
Mm-hmm.
So you remember back in school when you messed around and I got in trouble a lot, and remember they'd have you write a certain phrase over and over and over again, whatever
Mm-hmm.
it is. I will not, I don't know, make fun of the teacher over and over and over and over again. In some way, that's the same thing, like a microcosm of what we're talking about. Like the intent, the intent of that teacher was to have you engage in a form of like self hypnosis, right?
Sure.
So now imagine if you could somehow get like 1 million people to do the same thing at the same time, like engage in this, write the same thing over and over again at the same time. You're engaging in a form of like mass hypnosis.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
It will change the way your brain is, your brain waves are moving if you do that sort of thing. So if you can do that to 1 million people all at once, you can change the way people are thinking. Now, that's not necessarily the reason they're going for, although it's similar. They want that attention because they want it to affect their own sort of self-hypnosis, or their own ritual.
Yeah, their own aims.
Yeah, exactly. It's not necessarily about what you're doing or the people watching are doing. It's not necessarily about that. It's more about they just need eyeballs and more energy and brain waves looking at the same thing because they think it helps them in some way. But there's actually very little difference in kind between your teacher having you write that thing 1,000 times and some other form. And in some sense, that's sigil magic. It's just a difference in degree when we're talking about like sort of higher forms of sigil magic. It's affecting people's brain energy in a way that is either beneficial or harmful or whatever the intent is there. So if it sounds crazy, we do these sorts of things all the time in various ways.
Yes.
And so do lots of other people. And honestly, advertising is a form of magic in some ways. So these things are very, quote, real in a material sense. Like they have measurable effects, I think. And I obviously agree with you a great deal here in the sense that I think a lot of what we're witnessing around us it's more mystical than material.
Yeah.
Especially when you start dealing into the circles of power and whatnot. So I don't disagree, and I just the question's always why, and I guess there's thousands of reasons for that. And for me, I have a different sort of view of what magic is than maybe these people that need lots of eyeballs. Any magic I've ever engaged in was always something you did sort of by yourself in sort of like internal workings, or in a quiet place. It was more of a intimate and individual thing. I didn't want thousands of eyeballs on whatever I was doing. I don't really want I can't even comprehend the wanting what is that? Having that sort of narcissism to want millions of people to be really involved in whatever you're doing. That's just not my jam. But I think there is some truth to what you say. And just okay, so this kind of would segue into another topic I wanted to go into, but the kind of couples with what we're talking about here is like, okay, so maybe it doesn't, but it seems to fit. Your eyes and brain don't actually see reality. Your eyes and brain observe what data they can, and your brain creates a what could be called like a hologram of a reasonable interpretation or model of what it thinks the eyeballs are seeing, right? So there, by definition, there is way more to reality than the model that your brain's creating a map. Like what I'm seeing with my eyes and ears right now is a facsimile of what actually exists in reality. Fuck, I forgot where I was going with this. How does this relate to what we were just talking about?
Well, I do agree that there's a lot more going on than we can see with our eyes, or at least with our two eyes, with our, retinas, certainly.
Oh, so all right. So here's kind of where I was going with that. So if that's the case, and our brain's creating like a model of reality around us that we can comprehend, that would seem to also, that number one implies that there's more to reality than what we can see, hear, and touch, for one. But for two, that would also seem that reality is somewhat malleable, in the sense that if you can change the input, if you can change the brain, you can change the interpretation of reality, right? So if somebody wanted to change the way you interpret reality, that would grant that person a great deal of power over you, correct? I don't know. How does this see? I just lost it. I lost it again.
Penguin, what do you got, man? You got to be. I mean, you've been so quiet, and I'm thinking like he's just. Like,
I just fucking lost it. I don't know where I was going at all.
No. It's good. I'm just trying to take it all in. Yeah, I mean, I don't have any much to say on the mysticism thing. I'm just kind of. I really don't have any background in it, so I'm just kind of trying to take in where you went from the previous topics into this.
Yeah, it's a wild ride, but you guys said about an hour and a half ago, we got to get weirder. So I'm like, all right, let's do it. Yeah. Well, I think that the idea of the universe as a hologram is something we should probably do another Into the Void on. Like, I think
Sure.
that'd be a big subject to open up with.
Yeah.
Because there's a lot of roads to take on that.
So hologram doesn't even imply that there is a third party like projecting that or
Right.
like a
Doesn't have to be
simulation.
lizards from the moon.
Yeah. It's not like aliens are presenting a simulation. It could very well be that like reality itself presents itself to us in a certain way that our human brain can comprehend, and it's not necessarily what reality or the universe actually looks like. It's just it's just a projection in a way that our brains can interpret. Is kind of how I've been thinking about hologram theory lately. But but there's actually like legitimate truth like to that, in the sense that like our brain literally does that to what we see around us. Like that's how scientists would describe what is going on from your eyes to your brain. Your brain is creating like a model of which is the nearest approximation of what your senses are seeing. So it's like drawing maps. You know, it's the same idea of like your brain will fill in gaps in your memory. You know what I mean? It's the same kind of idea.
Well, and I mean, it's important to note that like this can also kind of happen in reverse, which proves what you're proves what you're saying, even though I think we got to explore more. But, you know, the classic, what is it from, is that Aldous Huxley with 2 + 2 = 5? Or
the world.
Yeah. Right. Or even, you know, like with Star Trek, there's the classic episode with Picard where he's being, you know, interrogated and tortured by Cardassians. And he's, you know, being ordered to, you know, say, you know, like there's 3 lights behind this Cardassian, and the Cardassian's like, no, there are 4. And, you know, so they're whatever the amount being, anyway, at the end, Picard is like, he says, the problem is that just before I was rescued, I actually thought that or was it 5 lights, right? Not 4. Anyway, I actually thought that there were 5 lights. Like you can get into that where you actually think you see these things, you know? And that's all of that was based on very real torture tactics and techniques. So yeah, you know, like your eyes are interpreting reality, you know, more so than necessarily seeing them. And that actually can be kind of a weird 2-way street. But what do you got, Sec?
Oh no, I was just kind of listening to what you're saying. In some sense, that is. So then the question becomes, right? Did was it Picard or Kirk you were talking about?
Oh, it was Picard.
Picard. So like the question then becomes is like eventually they said it so many times, like again, that's a torture technique, but he's doing ritual magic there as well.
Yes.
Like as you say it so many times that Picard eventually starts to believe it and sees it with his mind manifest that. So then the question becomes, right, like, is your brain just seeing that, or did he just manifest that actually into reality, right? And what's the difference? How would you begin to know what the difference is, right? If everyone there with all of their hearts believes that there is 5 lights there instead of 4, like, how would you know otherwise? And I guess this goes into, you know, objective reality, but how would you actually know otherwise?
How do I know that I'm not dreaming right now?
Okay, so here we go. How do you know whether the world didn't start last Tuesday?
I might not even have a podcast.
Everything just came into existence right now. Right now? Now.
Yeah. Penguin just went full Descartes. He was just like, no, that's it. It's a demon. He's tricking me. The whole thing.
Right. But I mean, okay, so it's an interesting thought experiment, but I also think there's some there in the sense that, like, I think that if you direct your will enough, you can legitimately change reality itself, like in the spiritual plane, but also in the material plane, because I think these things are connected. So again, I fucking lost sorry, this is like 5 hours of me podcasting today, but
yeah.
I mean, I think if you think hard enough and say it enough times, you could make 5 lights actually happen. And so I think that I think that's a large part of what we're actually seeing today in society, believe it or not. They want to convince you there's 5 lights and not 4.
Yeah, I mean, you're clearly like, here's the funny thing, we can, and we all kind of know this. Again, Sec and I keep saying that this can be explained scientifically or rationally as well without the extra component, but then I always feel that the rationalism doesn't always explain, but then why? Like, rationalism usually doesn't explain why. And in some ways, I think that's the most important part of it, because why leads to want, and want is what leads to these changes, like Sec is talking about, like actually creating the 5th light. But all 3 of us can go on Twitter, okay, not just because of the algorithm necessarily, but we could look at the same exact tweet or the same exact series of tweets, and we could walk away with radically different worldviews on what we read. Now, it's not just a different way that we're necessarily interpreting it. It's really the different way that, like, this, I mean, there is our own interpretation, of course, but I think ultimately what I'm trying to say is that you can go online and you can, whatever version of reality you want to believe exists, you can find. If you want to think that America is the greatest country in the world, I bet you could find that. If you want to think that, oh no, this is a shithole, you can find that. And it's not just interpretation. There are literally other groups out there espousing these ideas. If you want to think that the entire world's falling apart right now and the economy is shit,
holy shit, Brian, algorithms are a magical working. Listen to me. Listen. Okay. Holy fuck. My brain just fucking broke. So what you said is, okay, so what you're describing is entirely based on intent. Mm-hmm. By going out and searching what you want in what reality you want to see in the algorithm, you're exercising your will on this material plane through the algorithm. Because so what you want to see on the internet is entirely based on your intent. What else is a magical working if not exercising your intent and changing reality?
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. Like, magic is literally just impressing your intention upon the universe. Yeah.
Right. So what else would you call? Okay, so if I go to the internet with the intent that fucking World War III is around the corner and Putin's the fucking gonna take over the world and all these sorts of things, that's what I will find on the internet. So, and the algorithm will help me expedite that process. Right. Or exacerbate that process, we'll say. But if I have the intent that I want, the world is a beautiful place and there's flowers and puppies fucking everywhere. If I go onto the internet with that intent, that is the reality I will manifest on the internet. And the algorithm will again exacerbate whatever that problem is. But it really comes down to you exercising your intent. So the algorithm is in some sense a fucking magical working because it is an exacerbation. It's a amplifier of your will to create reality on the internet.
What do you got, Penguin?
Oh, I don't know how I got unmuted again. Yeah, I don't know if it is. So I don't know if it's form of magic or not, but yeah, I mean that's exactly what the algorithm is doing. Essentially, you're simulating.
You're gonna lock me up.
And maybe it's kind of scary. Maybe it's kind of scary that you were able to create something like that. For sure. Yeah, I don't know. I think it's crazy that you're able to create something like that, where it's not like that there's just a social dynamic, but that you are able to. I mean, I see that all the time. That's basically my experience on social media. As I've said many times, my social media pretty much is limited to Twitter. Mm-hmm. As far as like these big social media platforms, and yeah, I mean, you can see that, but you can see that you can turn on a certain radio station or another radio station or certain podcast or another podcast or something or other forms of media that YouTube videos or whatever. And you could just see people that are able to, so you can see people that are basically living in a certain reality and a certain interpretation of reality. But it's like, where does that come from? And I don't know. I don't know what you call it, manifesting or whatever, but obviously it comes from somewhere where they people make choices into kind of the ecosystem that they get into. So that comes from somewhere inside. So I can see that. Like you could call it manifesting. You could have people that are like, really look at a diverse number of sources. I mean, but a lot, or just a little, or they do it just enough to do basic modicum of fact checking, or like triangulation, I guess, between like different people and everything. But I mean, if you want to, you can. So if you wanted to, you could manifest basically just a certain interpretation of reality that you're already for some reason predisposed to.
Yeah, I mean, it's really life is very, very much choose your own adventure, as in like you got a narrative that you can pick that someone else already wrote, and you can choose whichever one you want.
You could have always kind of done that, but it would have taken like some effort to do that. It would take some mental effort. It would take some real, almost like mental plasticity to do that. And I guess now you can just kind of do it by choosing to click on what you click on. So that's one aspect of it. You could like purposely do that, on some level, with some agency, purposely choose to do that. But I guess you could do that with like unintentionally, without even being aware that you're doing it as well.
Yeah. I mean, or just put in the right hashtag, and there's your shake and bake reality.
I mean, you almost like you don't have to purposely completely curate all these different things and compare notes and fact check and double fact check the fact checkers. And I mean, there's ways to actually do this pretty smoothly and like naturally. But especially if you just, I mean, it's just a lot of it's just a function of like intellectual curiosity, honestly, to be honest with you. But like at the same time, it's so easy. Maybe it's so easy if you have intellectual curiosity, or if you're just like a very, biased person. Or think about this: if you come to the internet at an older age, where a lot of your opinions have like cemented. Now, I mean, I'm 36, turned 36 recently, and my opinions certainly haven't cemented entirely. I know, like, I can see back to way before I understood anything I understand now, and the data, because that was around age 30 that I really started to shift to 29, 30. Got into libertarianism. Actually, this would be a great discussion to the thing you opened the podcast about your generation, your little sub generation and movement with the libertarianism, and coming around out of the Ron Paul revolution and all that stuff, and that whole ecosystem of libertarians that came out of there that I found later after that time. So I wasn't part of it when it formed. I actually found it at the very like tail end of most of that, even though we can certainly reference people that are still podcasting and airing on radio and whatever, just like we talked about Ernie Hancock and various other guys, and you, I guess, would be an example of that. That was a huge. Where was I going with that? Oh yeah, so like, I honestly I forgot where I was going with that.
No, that's all right. Yeah, I think that would be interesting to kind of go go over that, like the history of libertarianism on the internet.
Put that on the list that you mentioned that, because that was there is something to be said about that specific movement of libertarianism. That I mean, Sec, you have been a lifelong anarchist, so we can't really. I mean, I know you certainly witnessed this. You were certainly around for this, but like at the same time, like I think just to bring it back to the second thing I think we talked about, because I just really went off track on the whole reality thing. totally get the
anyone is manifesting his will upon reality.
Yeah, but like I know exactly the movement you're talking about, but it's interesting. It's interesting the way I found it. I think we should wrap this up. So let's just close this out with this idea. Like it's interesting that I found that kind of movement that grew out of the Ron Paul. Yeah, this thing's going a long. We're over 2 hours. Thanks for. I'm just been a great and very varied podcast. So thanks for staying with us, guys. But I came to this movement and kind of backwards understood, like, why this isn't the most exciting and dynamic and often kind of cringy aspects of this, because it's a movement on the decline. Like a lot of people have already splintered off and left, but most have splintered off and left. And I'll never actually experience the kind of people, like I know people that are like jaded, disenchanted activists, but they were there in like Keene, New Hampshire, in that heyday of the time, in that heyday, and then they're gone, and they're still the person they were, but they're not, they're at least they're in touch. There's people that are just completely out of whatever activism or political, I guess, still activism on the ground or online or spreading the word, propaganda and whatnot, in the neutral sense. Facebook discussions, Twitter was around, and so early tweeting. No, it wasn't. I don't think it was big at the time, but yeah, it's really interesting the movement that you come out of, where I first heard about you, Brian, and quite a long time ago. So let's just triangulate to that. I came. Basically how Sek and I met is that when Free Talk Live started their Discord, I was listening to them on AM radio, and I had heard them once a week since like 2011, but I never listened. But I became like kind of a fan at in fall. I think it was fall, maybe summer, maybe even earlier than that. 2016. So oh yeah, I was listening to a lot of stuff. Donald Trump election. We need to have a student whole show, but let's just talk about it real quick to kind of tease that. Like, I kind of want to hear your thoughts. Donald Trump election, a lot of stuff going on, a lot of listen to a lot of weird stuff on AM radio.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of kind of weird stuff at the time. But one cool thing was Free Talk Live. People we referenced on the first episode of this podcast, because they had, Ian Freeman and Aria had just gotten arrested for that time. So that was a kind of a weird coincidence with the beginning of the podcast. But the Liberty Radio Network, everything like that was that's how I got into podcasts for real. That's how I got into I first heard about the ideas of libertarianism, and from there they launched a Discord channel, and in like December of 2016, I believe. And that's how I found about Bitcoin and cryptocurrency and all that stuff, that I guess it's whatever now. But from there, I found about the Discord program, and then went from libertarianism to this anarchism to, kind of to the point where I would listen to different podcasts and more podcasts. And then I said, why don't I start one of these of my own, as stereotypical as that is, as you kind of alluded to earlier, the infinite branchings off of libertarian podcasts. But I found that really interesting, of that world and how that world kind of existed. But I caught the very tail end, or even just the remnants of that thing, kind of thing. And once I realized that, I was like, oh, I'm just kind of hearing old war stories rehashed, and people that are kind of still at it, but going on. And so I totally understand why you realize that age is over, and you've been in a transitional period, and now there's a new age to go into. And I totally see, okay, something that would be so out of place just so and so years ago, but less than a decade ago, during a certain time, is now not only a fit for you and something you're interested in, something you're able to kind of transition to, and kind of move some attention that would have been devoted to like the ideas that were just being debated and back and forth really intensely at the time, and then kind of take that attention, because people, they kind of burned out of that, and that kind of thing isn't what I mean, isn't what's hot and new right now. You can only talk about the same thing again and again, the nap and everything, for so long. So it's really interesting. And I've always kind of, once I realized that I was caught on the back end of that stuff, and once I realized that a lot of the very, very, very first genesis of like me getting into the ideas of liberty and just actually advanced political ideas in general, because everything kind of changed after I found out about that, and Discord and Twitter and everything, and podcasts and whatnot. But like, I've realized that, okay, I'm not affiliated with that era, on the micro level era. I'm the beginning, because I'm just a few years younger than most of that crowd of people. They're elder millennials. They're around 40 years old, give or take. It's all the same people. There was a real age cohort, because people were a certain age at a certain time. But I'm part of, and Sek, and you're continuing, and you're obviously shifting your focus, and we're starting this podcast as the beginning of kind of a new era. As kind of goofy as that
No,
verbiage
no.
is, you know what I mean? We're a part of a new thing, and we're noticeably and tangibly different from that past era.
Well, you're totally on, Penguin, and this is kind of what I want to wrap up with. And this actually, I didn't get out earlier. Like the third reason of why are people because Sek had asked originally, why are so many people suddenly like being willing to talk about this? Now, I'm not saying this is true of me. I'm not saying this is true of Sek, and I'm not saying this is true of like Shane or not necessarily anybody. I mean, there's some people I think who it's true of, but not anybody we've mentioned here yet. Anyway, but I think a big part of it is like, yeah, like this is like the message of liberty as was understood by the old guard, as it were, that you were talking about, Penguin. It got stale, right? Nothing changed, and it got stale, and so people are shifting towards, like they're. I mean, I've even seen like people who are hardcore capitalists turn into hardcore communists. Like even in the past year or two, like that, and that's weird. Like that's a hell of a shift to go through. And so you really brought it full circle, because I think the other part is that people are just bored. And so they wanted to find the next intellectual pursuit to go for. Now, for me, it's, always been a part of me. So it's not out of boredom whatsoever. Now it's a matter of, I would almost argue, self-defense. But I will say this, and I think I want to get into in the next Into the Void. I definitely want to talk about the holographic concepts of the universe, Sek's algorithm there. We got to deep dive on that. I know he's,
that just popped into my head. I need a little time to chew on that one for a second.
Yeah, no, that's what I want, to come at with next. And then, I do want to have this conversation. I think it'd be great, Penguin, like you said, about like that kind of that old guard libertarianism and like these different phases and everything. But I just want to end off with this, is that the phase of libertarianism that I was a part of, I'm glad it's dead. I'm glad it's gone, because if it wasn't, I don't think podcasts like this could get the same purchase that they have now. I don't think they would be received with the same welcomeness, and not the legitimacy matters, but the same legitimacy, and it wouldn't have the same audience. And I'm so glad for the audience that's here to be able to hear it and be willing to just go way out there with stuff, and really consider it and contemplating it and have new ideas come up right in the middle of the episode, like what happened with Sek. So again, I'm glad ultimately that phase is over. Maybe it had its place for a while, but it's gone now, and just as well. And, cheers to the new era.
Hell yeah. Well,
Yeah,
dude,
damn
I
right.
appreciate you going so long with us, man.
Yeah, no, my pleasure.
Just really super quick. I was an anarchist before I was on the internet, really.
Right on.
So I had a completely different view of anarchism altogether, because I wasn't in chat rooms or anything like that. I hated computers. I was never into it. So I didn't get, like, I understand that there was different people, anarchists like disagreed, but I didn't think it was like unfriendly, like sectarianism and shit flinging like exist on the internet. And then I got on the internet in, I don't know, 2012 or 13 or something.
Yep.
Like for real.
Holy shit.
And it was like a shit show, sectarian.
Yep.
It was like Catholics versus Protestants kind of. And I'm like, what? We're all fucking anarchists. What are you talking? What is all this? And it was just a huge culture shock for somebody who had, like, my entire anarchist upbringing had been in books. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was like I had a completely different idea of what anarchism was.
Yeah.
Than the people that were terminally online or whatever.
So we've really got 3 different generations here, I think, of anarchism.
Yeah.
And we got to do an episode covering that and the differences.
I'm fascinated with micro histories, or I guess you could call it. That's the word I'm going to coin for this. I'm fascinated for I'm fascinated for like the 10-year spans of like the 10-year spans of like the nuances of, and especially the past 2 decades, the preceding 2 decades, because there's so much I wasn't there for, but it's like there are things that still play out very, very tangibly now that actually is affecting things, because it's like the same people that are alive, you know what I mean? Versus talking about, even at this point, early 90s, like Rothbard. I want that I want to read that history, and it's still like reason enough that the history is spotty-ish, although you can just look at first person sources. But that the 80s, the '70s. What was Carl Hess doing? We know that because he wrote a biography. But I mean, well, the movement in general, I guess I should say, because we probably can know people's actual biographies. But yeah, I love to know and what the greater context is. And the greater context doesn't come from anything except, kind of reading the books if people were telling their thoughts and just kind of knowing the history and just consuming the media of the time,
Yeah. I mean, maybe I'll even see if I can get my wife on that episode, because she's in her 20s, but she's been a part of all this stuff just as much. She's been in in New Hampshire almost as long as I have. So, I mean, it'd be nice to have all those different generations kind of talking about that. Congratulations.
Yeah.
Right on, man.
All right. Well, we got to let you go.
Let's wrap this up.
Okay.
Well, everybody,
the episode, title it Microhistories. I love that.
That's sweet.
Microhistories. Yeah. Okay.
Well, everyone, welcome to the age of Aquarius, and celebrate the death of the age of Horus. And be excellent to each other. And Sovereign, thank you again. Your perspective is always valued here, and I really appreciate you spending so much fucking time with us and getting crazy. And do you want to plug some things?
I think most people know where to find me, but just head over to sovereigntech.com, get your hookup. Lots of fun stuff, lots of things going on, all kinds of different conversations, and you even get some of this wacky shit. So go for it.
And sign up for his newsletter. It's dope as fuck.
Yeah. Sovereign.substack.com. You're in for a good time there.
All right. Thanks, brother. It's always a blast.
Same, guys.
See you on here next time, man.
Awesome.
Yeah, it was awesome.
All right. Peace, everybody.
Peace.
Be excellent to each other.
Ciao. Technical difficulties.
It's not stopping.
No, it is. It's just my computer's, I don't know, a little taskbar came in front of the button.